Hello, true crimerers. Whoa, we're on shaky cam alert. You're welcome. Stop it, Mike. Okay. I'm holding my phone. I got too lazy to put it on the thing. And what are we here for? Oh, compilation video. If I look sweaty and shiny, it's because I live in Arizona and I just went outside for 9.5 seconds. And, well, yeah. Hey! Hi! So this is going to be a compilation video. It's only going to have 5 videos in it, though. I'm so sorry. But they're 5 longer videos, kind of. They're 5 videos that I have posted over on Instagram since doing my new little posting schedule thing. I feel like I'm doing too much because I'm noticing I don't have much free time anymore. Anyway, these are 5 videos that I've posted over on the Instagram. So they're each like, I don't know, 10-ish minutes long. The CapCut thing says 47 minutes worth of video. So that's how long it's going to be, plus whatever this turns out to be. Yeah, that's behind the scenes for you. You're welcome. Not stupid, Mike. Am I even looking in the right place when I do it this way? I'm probably staring off into wherever. I'm probably not even looking at you. Can you just shut up, Mike, and get on with it? Yeah, I probably can. Okay. So anyway, hi, how are you? Great. Anyway, here are 5 videos, true crime videos, from my Instagram account. Viewer discretion is advised. Oh, also, please subscribe. And go follow me on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook. All the links are in the link tree in the description below this video. So go do it, please. Thanks. You don't have to, but if you want to, it's there. Thanks. Okay. This is so awkward. Viewer discretion is advised. Bye. This is a photo of a young girl tending to her mother's grave, something no child should ever have to do. And to make matters worse, she, like many family members of missing and murdered Indigenous women, they are still awaiting justice. Hello, true Instagramers. This is the case of Allison Highwolf. Viewer discretion is advised. Our story today takes place in Bighorn County, Montana, specifically in Hardin, Montana. I don't have a whole lot of information about Allison. Allison's mom would describe her as a miracle baby because I guess during her birth there were a lot of complications that could have potentially cost both of their lives, but thankfully both survived the ordeal. She was described as having a humongous personality, big personality, very loving, very outgoing, just an all-around amazing individual. And she had 4 children of her own, 4 daughters. Allison was also someone who would stand up for anyone who was being picked on. She had no problems basically teaching her daughters that you got to stand up for yourself, and also you got to stand up for others, especially to those who can't fight for themselves. I just wish someone would do the same for Allison now. By February of 2015, Allison was actually living in a motel with her current boyfriend. The father of her children, there was a couple different fathers. She really wasn't in touch with them at all. So her and her boyfriend were living at the Roadway Inn in Hardin, Montana. I guess they were living in a hotel or motel because both of their families weren't too keen on this relationship. From what I understand, there's not a lot of information, but from what I do understand, there was issues with domestic abuse in this relationship. Meaning the boyfriend was apparently abusive to Allison. Her boyfriend typically worked starting in the late afternoon, which would go into the very, very late evening, sometimes, until like 11 or midnight at night. And so on a day in February of 2015, the boyfriend says that he got off of work and then went back to the hotel. When he got to their room that particular night, the room was on fire. There was smoke billowing out of the room. So 911 was called, the firemen arrived, and they put the fire out pretty quickly. There really wasn't a whole lot of damage done to the hotel room. He kind of lying somewhat behind the door, not directly behind it, but like near the door, was Allison Highwolf, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. This is when the investigation kind of just sort of falls flat on its face from the get-go, which is unfortunately very common with cases about murdered and missing Indigenous people. The autopsy would show that she died of smoke inhalation, so the fire is something that did kill her. What they noted was that the cause of death was undetermined, but the report suggested that Allison did it to herself, that she set the room on fire and ended her own life that way. One of the detectives, basically from the get-go, without knowing anything about her, said that Allison had a history of trying to end her life, which, according to her family, is completely false. She had never tried anything like that before. And I know it happens, but it's not common for someone to end their own life by fire. That's a hell of a way to go, and like I said, while it happens, it's not common. Police just sort of vaguely kind of put a time frame of the fire likely happened between the mid-afternoon that day until just before she was found. Well, maybe ask the hotel people, because they would have noticed a fire mid-afternoon. But apparently they didn't look into it at all. They just sort of put a general time frame on when this fire probably could have happened. Because she was found dead just after midnight. So if you're going to suggest that she started the fire like at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and no one noticed until the boyfriend got to the hotel, that's insane to me. The police did not allow Allison's family to see her body, claiming that she had just been covered in soot and it was not something they wanted to see. But by their rights, they have the right to see her, but they didn't allow it. The first time they saw Allison was actually at her funeral. And when her mom looked into the casket at her daughter's body, she noticed and took photos of several very strange bruises on Allison. She had bruises on her head. She had bruises on her arms, her cheek. It looked like an altercation had taken place. And police were just kind of like, oh, you know what? That's probably just the funeral home. They did a really bad job. Maybe that's why she got bruised. Like, what? Do your jobs. It even appeared that Allison had marks around her neck suggesting she could have been strangled at some point. But police were like, no, that was just a funeral home. The toxicology report did show that she had alcohol and methamphetamines in her system. So they also kind of ran with that. Like, she was drunk and just sort of high out of her mind, so maybe she did it on accident. Allison's mom just wanted something. And I guess one of the officers looked her in the face and said, just because your daughter died doesn't mean the world revolves around you. I don't know how she had restraint, but she did. In 2019, because police are doing jack shit about investigating this as anything other than suicide / possible accident, and could care less about investigating this as a possible murder, like from her supposedly abusive boyfriend. So some of Allison's family, they contacted the Sovereign Bodies Institute. It's an organization that helps Indigenous people. So the Institute looked into this, and they determined that Allison was very likely murdered. But they themselves couldn't do anything about it, because they're not like an actual, investigating a police group. But the police there locally are like, is it? Was it? Supposedly, they found a note in the hotel room that could be interpreted as a suicide note. The mother who saw a photo of the note said that's not even her daughter's handwriting, and it was like a loose interpretation that would lead to it being a suicide note. It wasn't like a direct note. The surveillance video, the CCTV from the hotel, well, it conveniently went missing because it worked. The video there worked. They confirmed it. It was even notated in the police file for this, but now suddenly it's gone. Well, that's a little weird. They also found out that in the hotel room were 3 cell phones. Only one of them was ever looked at. The other 2, meh. Even if this was a possible accident or she did it to herself, they weren't using fact-finding to determine that. They just said it. They just guessed it. They didn't put any actual effort into this because, well, she's an Indigenous woman, and it's just, meh. It really does sound like the family and her friends believe the boyfriend had something to do with this, just because he was the first person to report the fire, and if the fire had been going on before he got there, how did no one else see it? That's insane. Again, this is an issue with people just not wanting to look into and investigate cases about missing and murdered Indigenous women. Native and Indigenous people in this country, they disappear at literally twice the per capita rate of white individuals in this country. Even though the population is significantly smaller than the white population. Indigenous women who live on either tribal lands or tribal areas, they are murdered at 10 times more than the national average. 10 times. And more often than not, you can't get any information about their cases. I have tried to cover cases before where their entire story compromises of 3 little sentences. This person was found murdered here. There's no photos. There's no autopsy reports. There's nothing. It's just, she was found dead. Next. So at the very least, police just treated this like they couldn't care less. And that's just sad. I can't sit here and say that Allison Highwolf was murdered, but I also can't sit here and say she did it to herself. She had 4 daughters that she loved dearly. Her family said she would never do this, and she never had tried before, despite what police had said. And by the way, the detective who said that no longer works with the department. Shocker. They just assume things when it comes to these women. They don't look into it. They don't research. They don't investigate. They just assume. Unfortunately, that's where her case stands. There is a wide belief that Allison was murdered or met with foul play. She was in a potentially abusive relationship. There were domestic issues. She is found dead by her boyfriend, who is the only one to have seen this fire, apparently, before calling it in. So it looks like something a lot more than what they put it down as. I just wish they were moved enough to care to actually look into this. But unfortunately, that's all I have for you on this story. Her death is still listed as undetermined. It's not listed as suicide. It's not listed as murder. Undetermined. But that is it for this case. I hope one day her family gets justice. I shall see you for the next case. Obviously. You're so stupid. I don't know how to end videos, so I usually just injure myself and scold myself for being an idiot. Okay, bye. An entire family murdered because money. Hello, true Insta-Crimerers. This is the case of the Hruby Family murders. Viewer discretion is advised. The Hruby family consisted of the patriarch, John, his wife of close to 30 years, Joy, who would go by Tinker, and the 2 of them had 2 children. They had Catherine and they had Alan. The family lived in the Duncan, Oklahoma area, or I guess it's in Stevens County, and they were a well-respected, well-known family in the area. John was the publisher at the Duncan Banner, a newspaper. Something that actually was, he was the 3rd generation to run this newspaper in his family. His father before him and his grandfather before that. The Hruby family really kind of made its home there in Duncan sometime in 1965 or so. John and Tinker met while at college, and they fell head over heels in love with each other, and were married in 1989, and then went on to have some kids. John and Tinker were both incredibly involved in the community. They were high-standing members of the Humane Society there in Duncan, And they absolutely loved animals and wanted to make sure animals were always, safe and protected and being adopted and all that. In his spare time, John fixed ham radios, he made model airplanes. Tinker was involved in real estate, something she was excellent at doing. Their daughter Catherine was an excellent student in high school. She was a member of the volleyball team and was heavily involved in various clubs and organizations throughout her educational years. Their son Alan always seemed to be kind of a decent kid growing up, a normal-ish kid. But as he got older, it appeared that money was something very, very important to him, something that he seemed to value, well, more than people, it seemed. Alan, at the time of this story, was attending college, but he had gotten into some recent troubles. He had apparently traveled abroad. He had gone to Paris and other places there in Europe, and he had stolen his grandmother's credit card and racked up a significant amount of debt. When his dad found out, John, his dad reamed him out, and his dad actually reported the theft to police. Alan was given allowances over the years, and his parents usually gave him the money that he wanted, but then he began to try to live this lavish lifestyle. He thought he was richer than he was, and he really did so because he just kept taking money from his parents or grandparents or whatever the case may be. It was just money, 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 money to him. That was his priority. He wanted to buy the nicest things with other people's money. So what happened then is after his dad called the police and reported his own son for theft, and this is mainly just to teach the kid a lesson. He didn't want his son to be in trouble, but he also knew his son did something wrong, and his son needs to learn the repercussions of doing these types of things. Pretty good parent in my book. And then John and Tinker basically cut Alan off from their finances. They weren't going to be giving him money anymore to spend and spend and spend on a bunch of pointless crap. And that made Alan pretty mad. About October 13th, 2014, friends and family of the Hrubys hadn't really seen or heard from them in about 3 or 4 days, which was pretty unusual. The Hrubys also had a housekeeper, and it was around that October 13th day when the housekeeper would walk into the home, and they discovered something absolutely horrific. There were 3 bodies inside the house. John, Tinker, and Catherine had all been shot dead. The only person not in the house was Alan. But Alan was attending college, so he had a reason not to be there. So at first, that didn't really make anything all that suspicious. This is also coming literally just at the same time his dad had reported him to the police. And so what happened was that the housekeeper's daughter called Alan and said, you have to come back home. Something horrible has happened. And so Alan gets back home. He parks his Jeep in front of the house. And he finds out what happens, and apparently he is absolutely hysterical. He is screaming and crying. They bring him to the police station just to ask him some questions, and he is like a hot mess. He appears to be genuinely distraught, but it turns out that was really more of just a performance. When Alan went into the police station just to talk about the family, he was also placed under arrest for the fraud and theft issues with his grandmother's card. And that's all he was being held for. But he was being considered potentially a suspect in the murder of his family. But they had to kind of figure out where he was. And they looked to his social media, and they see that he had posted tweets or Facebook posts the night of the murders with a photo outside of his dorm window saying, home. He had gone to a party around the night that his parents and sister were probably killed, because they estimated the family had been dead for about 4 days. And this sitting in the house. The night that it may have happened, or possibly the night after, Alan was at a party in a hotel room, just having a good old time. He took plenty of pictures. He took this photo of his friend sitting on a bed. And it all seemed to be too convenient, almost as if Alan was trying to create an alibi, stating that he could not have been at the home killing his family, because he was all the way at Oklahoma University. He couldn't have done it. But he very quickly changed his tune. It was literally like a day or two after the bodies were found and after he was arrested for the theft that Alan just flat out confessed. He just spilled the beans. He said what he did. He had stolen a gun, I guess, from his dad and went into the house on probably around October 9th, 2014, and he just shot his family. Just shot them, cold blood. Just put a bullet into each one of them. And he told police the reason why at the time was that because his parents were cutting him off from the money. And so if he killed both of them and he killed his sister, well, there is an inheritance that he would get because, you know, his family wasn't super wealthy, but they had money. And he knew that there would be money given to him in the event that his parents died. But then also his sister needed to die so that she wouldn't get anything because he wanted all of the money. So he just said, basically admitted to being a cold-blooded murderer, killed his entire family for money. It's pretty sick. He's only 19 years old when he did this. 19. They had confiscated his Jeep because he had parked it outside the house when he was called about after his family was killed, and I guess they found some evidence in the Jeep. They did find more physical evidence that basically corroborated the fact that he was the killer of the family, plus to go with his confession. And then it would be a while later where he came out and said he changed his tune in terms of why he did it. He now then said, I don't know why I did it. I'm still trying to figure it out. I told police back then it was because my parents cut me off from money and I wanted the inheritance. So that's what I told police then. But now I don't know why I did it. I honestly just can't figure it out. Okay. He also said that he 100% would accept the death penalty if he was convicted. He said he would welcome it. But turns out he didn't really want it that much because he would end up taking a plea deal, confessing to first-degree murder for 3 different charges of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. And that is where he is now to this day, and he will rot in a prison cell for the rest of his natural life simply because he wanted money. Please know that it is literally never worth it to do some nonsense bullshit like this for money. A happy married couple who loved their kids and a teenage girl who was literally just starting her life, all gunned down and murdered brutally by their own loved one simply because he wanted to lavish himself with gifts. But that is it for this case, True Crime Maroonies. Hope you found it interesting. So, I will see you all next Thursday for the next true crime story here on the Gram. So until then, sayonara, suckaroonies. Yeah. Okay, bye. A man walks away to just go smoke a cigarette. About a year later, his body is found. Hello, true Instagramers. This is the case of Matthew Albrecht. Viewer discretion is advised. 26-year-old Matthew Albrecht was a father to 2 young girls. One of them, at the time of the story, was, I think, 5 years old. The other one was a little under 2 years old. He was described as an awesome dad, a loving father, and he would do anything for his 2 kids, and he certainly would never, ever abandon them. It was about 2 p.m. on April 16th, 2010, in the Mankato area of Minnesota. Matthew and his dad, Ron, and a couple other guys were working on fixing an SUV, and this was, I guess, near the parking area by the Cato Ballroom. They got everything working again, and so Matthew said, hey, I'm going to go walk away and smoke a cigarette real quick, and that's exactly what he did. They would later find out that Matthew was seen again and seen for the last time about an hour or so after he walked away from his dad and friends. and I guess he was seen near the Washington Park area. The thing is Matthew was supposed to pick up his daughters, or one of his daughters, about an hour or so after the SUV was fixed. He was going to use that SUV to go pick up his daughter. But he never got back to his dad and his friends who were still there with the vehicle. And they're like, well, where the heck is he? And they're trying to reach him by his cell phone, but he's not answering. And they pretty much immediately begin to search for him. And so they're looking everywhere. They're calling his friends. They're not having any luck. They did find out later about the sighting near Washington Park, but outside of that, no one else had seen him. No one else had heard from him. And he had told absolutely no one that he had plans to go somewhere else, that he had plans to skip town maybe, or anything. No, he didn't say a thing to anyone. And the fact that he wasn't there to then pick up his daughter became extremely concerning, so they would report Matthew missing. And as the days would go by, then the weeks, and then the months, with them finding nothing, no traces of him anywhere, they determined that his cell phone was last used that exact same day at approximately 2:30 p.m., but they could not locate the cell phone for some reason, with pinging and all that. It's just like he just sort of went off to go smoke a cigarette and then he just vanished into thin air, like so many people tend to do. They finally got a break 10 months later. A completely unrelated family, they had a dog, and this dog would kind of go out into like these open fields and, the wooded areas. And one day the dog came back with a bone in its mouth. And the dog's owners were like, that looks like a human bone. So they contacted police. They surrendered the bone, obviously, to the authorities. But the problem was, around the time when this bone was found, the entire area was like covered in snow, and it was really difficult to navigate. So they really had to call off any kind of search because it just wasn't feasible. But then when May of 2011 came around, they were finally able to restart their search. And when they're searching this area, they found an iPhone. They found a pair of shoes. They found a photograph that they would confirm belonged to Matthew. And they're kind of just scattered in that general area. And then finally, they found partial skeletal remains. The full body was not there. The full body as a whole has not been completely recovered. But they did take all of the skeletal remains they did find. They were human. And then they ran tests with DNA and all that. And they confirmed that the skeletal remains belonged to 26-year-old Matthew Albrecht. I guess this is in the Sleepy Hollow area, somewhere near Mankato. Because of the state of the body being skeletal remains, they could not officially determine the cause or the manner of death. However, they did open a homicide investigation into this case. I think they believe that this was likely a homicide, but they don't have any physical evidence to say that he was killed by somebody else, because there was no, I guess, damage to his bones that would indicate that he had been shot or even stabbed, because sometimes you can tell if a person was stabbed, even if it was just their skeletal remains, but they can't determine if maybe, he was strangled or beat to death or something along those lines. They couldn't determine it. But again, it is pretty much widely believed that he was likely murdered. But by who is the question. All of the belongings they found were confirmed to belong to him. They didn't find any evidence on any of those belongings that would point to another person. There was no evidence near his body that would yield any evidence that led to another person. There really just wasn't any evidence at all. The only thing police have been able to work on is just like rumors that float around town of like, was this drug related? Apparently he had, I guess, a small criminal history. Maybe they thought, maybe it's related to that. But it's just rumors and speculation, because police have gotten no tips. They've gotten virtually no tips. They've gotten virtually no leads. They have nothing. They have nothing about this case. And it's just super bizarre, because he just walked away to go smoke a cigarette. He was expected to pick up his daughter literally an hour after he did that. And then he just vanished and was killed. By who? For what reason? Still to this day, and we're talking 12, 13 years later, is unknown. But, as Robert Stack always says in Unsolved Mysteries, someone somewhere out there does know the truth. And perhaps that someone is you. Perhaps you know someone who knows someone about this case. Perhaps someone has talked and you're too afraid to say anything because you're afraid you may get injured or hurt or killed because you talk. You're afraid that you may get into some kind of trouble. You can always report information to the police anonymously. So, if you have any information about the death of Matthew Albrecht, you can contact the Blue Earth County Sheriff's Department at 507-304-4830. And perhaps you can help get this family the closure and the answers it deserves. His daughters are growing up without a father, and they just want to know why. If you can help, please do so. But that is it for today's video, True Crime Aroonies. Until the next case, True Crime Aroonies, I shall see you for the next one. Toodaloos. Here, inside the walls of this house, a marriage would end in bloodshed. Hello, true Instacrimerers. This is the case of Meredith Chapman. Viewer discretion is advised. Meredith Chapman was born on January 31st, 1985, and she was born in Newark, Delaware. In 2003, she graduated from Avon Grove High School, and then she would go to the University of Delaware. She would at one point get married, but then at the time of this particular story, that marriage was basically, from what I understand, kind of dissipated, and they were going their separate ways. So in 2017, Meredith Chapman at this point is actually working now at the University of Delaware. And in 2017, she gets an email from a prospective applicant, and his name is Mark Gerardo. Way back in 1986, Mark Gerardo would meet a young woman. Her name was Jennair Cox. Jennair worked at a Taco Bell. He became instantly smitten with her, kind of one of those love at first sight type scenarios. They reconnected about 4 or 5 years after they originally met, and then in 1993, Mark and Jennair got married. He loved Jennair's confidence, her smile. She had a very strong demeanor, a very strong personality. By all accounts, their marriage was wonderful. In 2017, Mark Gerardo had applied for a job at the University of Delaware, and he began that email exchange with Meredith Chapman. Mark was offered the position. So he would move from... So he and Jennair at that time were actually living in South Carolina. So at this point, he now moves to Delaware to start his new job. Jennair is basically staying back in South Carolina because she needs to find... She basically needs to lease the house out. So there is about 45, 50 days or so when Mark is basically separated from Jennair. They only communicate really by phone. During that time, Mark and Meredith, they had a very strong professional relationship, but then it kind of became something more. And then it very quickly turned into a romantic fling type thing. By the time Jennair had moved to Delaware, Meredith and Mark had already basically formed an actual relationship. They had already shared several kisses. They've already gone on several dates. It got to a point where Jennair became very suspicious of just things, behaviors. And at one point she confronted Mark, like, are we okay? Are you cheating on me? And she said, is it with Meredith? Because she knew the two of them had a strong relationship at work, but she kind of began to speculate, it's her, isn't it? You're having an affair with her. And this basically caused her to kind of spiral a little bit, understandably. Then what happens next is that on Valentine's Day of 2018, Jennair basically confronted Mark, officially stating, I now know for a fact you have been having an affair with Meredith. And she's pissed. But how does she know for a fact? She took some recording devices and she sewed them into Mark's clothing items, like his jacket that he would always wear to work. Sewed it into that. So that way, anytime he interacted with someone, it would be recorded and she would be able to hear it. She was able to then obtain the text messages and phone calls coming from Mark's and to Mark's phone. So she also now had seen hundreds of texts, Snapchats, photos sent between the two of them, between Mark and Meredith. She had seen it all. And now the marriage is crumbling, and it's crumbling fast. And so Jenner and Mark decide to go see some kind of counselor, marriage counselor, something. We got to figure this out. And they start going, and in Jenner's mind, it doesn't seem to be going well. Mark is noticing that Jenner is kind of becoming a little borderline unstable. She would actually end up being diagnosed with PTSD by a psychiatrist because of the situation from what's happening within her marriage. And then on the night of April 23rd, 2018, Jenner would enact a plan that she had set in motion a while back. She had purchased a wig. She had purchased a gun about 5 weeks prior. She had texted Mark saying, hey, can we meet for dinner tonight so we can discuss this, our possible divorce proceedings? Because at that point, divorce was pretty much going to be in the picture. So Mark got to the restaurant and he's waiting for her. She sends him a text, hey, I'm running late, just wait for me. Then she sends another text, hey, I'm probably not going to make it. You might as well just go home. And then she sends him a text of a used condom in a trash can. And Mark immediately realizes, oh my God, she's at Meredith's house. And then he gets another text from her and it says, you ruined my life. And then the next text she sent, I hope you never find happiness. Mark's panicking. He's freaking out. He tries to text her. He tries to call her. She's not responding to anything. He drives straight to Meredith's house. When he approaches the house, he opens the door. He sees Meredith Chapman lying face down in a very large pool of blood. And she was dead. He just screamed agony and then ran out of the house, called 911 on his cell phone. And when police arrived, when they entered the home, they did confirm and find the body of Meredith Chapman, but they also found another body. They found the body of Jenner Gerardo. And at first, they really suspected Mark had done something, this is an affair gone wrong, love triangle, something. He must have done this. They were quickly able to rule him out just based on where he was with witnesses and his cell phone pinging, but also with gunshot residue tests and all of that, the location of the gun. They were able to officially confirm that Mark was not the one to do this, that this was a murder-suicide. Jenner had broke into the home of her husband's lover, shot and killed her immediately after she walked in the house, and then just shot herself. They also found Jenner had rented a car, a Cadillac. That car was parked just a little bit down the ways from the house. The Cadillac had more evidence that would end up pointing to this murder-suicide plot. They then went through Jenner's emails and her search histories and all of that and everything. She had been planning this for several months. And now, Mark Gerardo, I don't even know how to describe it. This is a tough one because there is a point in this where you kind of feel bad for the killer to a degree. You feel bad for the situation. You feel bad for basically how she was treated. Then she decided to do something evil and awful and terrible, and you stop feeling bad for her at that point. But what I'm saying is you kind of you understand what triggered her, so to speak. But then you also realize, well, she took it way too far. But I mean, justice obviously won't get served. And it's just, you know what? It's just a really, really sad story. Just tragic. So unnecessary. But that is it for this case, True Crime Maroonies. We will see you next Thursday for another one here on Instagram. But until then, True Crime Maroonies. Sayonara. That's my normal sign-off that you guys are probably used to. You're probably doing it with me, right? You guys get... Hello, true Instacrimers. This is the case of Shemel Mercurius. Viewer discretion is advised. Unfortunately, I don't really have a lot of background information on her, but Shemel Mercurius was originally born in Guyana, and then 3 years prior to this particular case, she moved to the States, specifically to the Brooklyn, New York area. It was the very end of May in 2016. Shemel was asked to babysit her cousin. And Shemel loved her 3-year-old cousin, so she, of course, said, yes, I will definitely do that. Shemel and a friend of hers were at, I guess, the apartment where she was babysitting. And sometime later that evening, 911 would get a frantic phone call that someone has just been shot. When police arrive at the apartment there in Brooklyn, there is a woman on the ground, and it turned out to be 16-year-old Shemel Mercurius. Shemel was still breathing. She had a pulse. It was very weak. The paramedics were obviously called, but for some reason, I mean, this is Brooklyn, so I guess, it probably takes a little bit longer, unfortunately, but the paramedics were taking a long time to arrive, and the police officers who were there on scene were doing everything they could to keep her stable, and in her very faint breathing, in essentially what would later become her dying breaths, she muttered the man's name who shot her, and she gave a description of the man. And then afterwards, her friend that was there, who was not harmed, and the 3-year-old child was also not harmed, she would confirm the identity of the man. That man's name was Tariq Stevens. And apparently what happened was Tariq knocked on the door of the apartment where he knew Shemel would be. He allegedly, when she opened the door, he allegedly pushed her back inside the apartment and said something along the lines of, "Don't ever lie to me." And in his hand was a submachine gun. And then he just, out of nowhere, without even letting her say or do anything, he just lifted the gun and fired a few rounds, one into her arm, and then another one went through her abdomen, and that would later prove to be the fatal shot. Because Shemel, unfortunately, by the time she arrived at the hospital, would already be pronounced dead. Why did this even happen? Apparently, 3 days prior to this, Shemel was at a daycare center where she met Tariq for the very first time. They had never seen each other before. It was just a very chance encounter. Tariq, at the time, was 25 years old. He apparently tried flirting with the 16-year-old child. And I guess he tried to ask her out. Somewhere in all this conversating between the two of them, they must have at least exchanged numbers or something to the point where he would know where she lived. But he tried to ask out a 16-year-old child. He would be obviously turned down by Shemel. He didn't like that at all. So, a few days later, after he was just super mad and angry that a child turned his advances down, well, he decided to act upon it. So, he found out where she was, approached her, and just shot her until she was dead or dying. Police were able to obtain CCTV footage from the apartment building where this all happened, and they confirmed they see a man running down the hallway, getting into the elevator, and fleeing from the building, and this man fits the description of what was described by Shemel in her last moments and by her friend, and the man is also holding what appeared to be some kind of small submachine gun. It wouldn't take long. Police were able to catch up to him, and they were able to arrest him without any incident, and he was charged with the murder of Shemel Mercurius. Shemel was a high school student. at Edward Murrow High School. She had dreams and aspirations to go on to college, and she really wanted to become a nurse because she was someone who really wanted to help people and to help make a difference in people's lives. But that never got to happen because a 25-year-old man was mad that a 16-year-old child turned him down for a date. He would plead not guilty to the murder, and he would go to trial, and the evidence was more than enough. They have the eyewitness testimony of the friend. They have the CCTV footage of him running from the building, holding the exact same type of weapon that was used to kill her. They had witnesses to show that the two of them had interacted at the daycare a few days prior. It was all there plain as day, and so he was convicted of her murder. The judge, when sentencing him, looked at him in the face and said, "All of the evidence we have indicates it was you," because he continued to deny it. She said to him, "When you take a life, what do you give in exchange for that life?" Well, there's nothing you give in exchange for that life. There's nothing to give. She looked right in the face and said, "I am not showing you any mercy because you showed that 16-year-old girl no mercy." This man destroyed a family, not only there in Brooklyn, but also the family she had in Guyana. He took all of that away from them in just a moment. And so the judge slapped him with a 41-year sentence, 41 years to life. So he'll be rotting for quite some time. Again, all for what? For what? Why did this beautiful young woman have to die? Why did her future have to be erased? Because a grown-ass man was rejected, as he should have been. I hope wherever she is resting comfortably, and I hope she is resting in peace. But that is it for this case. It's kind of a short one today. Hope you found it interesting. As usual, if you're stumbling across this video for the first time, seeing me, hi, I'm Mike. I tell true crime stories, obviously. I tell one here on Instagram every Thursday, one on Friday on Facebook every Friday, and I tell four over on my main platform, YouTube, a week. So please subscribe and follow me everywhere. I also post a few crime stories a week on TikTok as well. So follow me everywhere if you like to. If you like this sort of thing, if you're weirdos and cuckoo wackadoos like the rest of us. But that is it for today's video. I shall see you next Thursday for another true crime case on here, and otherwise I will see you on my other platforms. So until then, cha-cha for now, true crime, a Rooney dooney ding dongs. Bye. Yeah.